Welcome to Jersey Reads the Classics, an audiobook podcast delving into the finest works of our literary masters. Unfortunately, it's read by this woman.
What the hell? Who cares? Let's go on an adventure.
Hello, and welcome back to Jersey Reads the Classics with me, your host, Rosie DeCandia. Well, my friends, as you know, we have started a new book, and that's why I'm so festively dressed, because now, I know it's November, but it's time to get festive. The holidays are just around the corner. So, without any further ado, let's get back to our book, A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. So what we left off was the singer was at Scrooge's door, singing, "God bless you, merry gentlemen, may nothing you dismay." Scrooge seized the ruler with such energy of action that the singer fled in terror, leaving the keyhole to the fog and even more congenial frost. At length, the hour of shutting up the counting house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool and tacitly admitted the fact to the expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffled his candle out and put on his hat. "You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose," said Scrooge. "If quite convenient, sir." "It's not convenient," said Scrooge, "and it's not fair. If I was to stop half a crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used. I'll be bound." The clerk smiled faintly. "And yet," said Scrooge, "you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work." The clerk observed that it was only once a year. "Ah, poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December," said Scrooge, buttoning his great coat to the chin. "But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning." "Yeah, here we go. You're a mean one, Mr. Scrooge." The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white comforter dangling below his waist, for he boasted no great coat, went down a slide on Cornhill at the end of a lane of boys 20 times in honor of its being Christmas Eve, and then ran home to Camden Town as hard as he could pelt to play at blind man's buff. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. All right, so at least he went out for a Christmas Eve dinner for himself, even though that's what he wasn't celebrating. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner, who we all know is Marley. They were a gloomy suite of rooms in a lowering pile of building up a yard where it had so little business to be that one could scarcely help fancying it must have run there when it was a young house, playing at hide and seek with other houses and forgotten the way out again. Oh, good Lord. It was old enough now and dreary enough, for nobody lived in it but Scrooge, the other rooms being all let out as offices. The yard was so dark that even Scrooge, who knew its every stone, was fain to grope with his hands, because he's too frickin' cheap to have candles outside to light his fucking way, or have whatever lanterns outside. The fog and frost so hung about the black old gateway of the house that it seemed as if the genius of the weather sat in mournful meditation on the threshold. He's another one just like Washington Irving. They're very verbose, but it's very poetic. But now it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door, except that it was very large. It is also a fact that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his whole residence in that place. Also, that Scrooge had as little of what is called fancy about him as any man in the city of London, even including, which is a bold word, the corporation, alderman, and livery. Let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley since his last mention of his 7 years as dead partner that afternoon. And then let any man explain to him, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any, intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face. Da, 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 da. They always show that. I love that. Always, it scares me whenever Scrooge goes to his front door to like go in. His knocker becomes Marley's scary, spooky face. It's actually it's off-putting, but I like it. Huh. Marley's face. It was not impenetrable shadow as the other objects in the yard were, but had a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on its ghostly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred, as if by breath or hot air, and though the eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless. That and its livid color made it horrible. But its horror seemed to be in spite of the face and beyond its control, rather than a part of its own expression. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say that he was not startled, or that his blood was not conscious of a terrible sensation to which it had been a stranger from infancy, would be untrue. But he put his hand upon the key he had relinquished, turned it sturdily, walked in, and lighted his candle. He did pause with a moment's irresolution before he shut the door, and he did look cautiously behind it first, as if he half expected to be terrified with the sight of Marley's pigtails sticking out in the hall. But there was nothing on the back of the door, except the screws and nuts that held the knocker on. So he said, "Pooh, pooh," and closed it with a bang. The sound resounded through the house like thunder. Thunder, lightning. The way you love me is frightening. I gotta knock, knock, knock on wood, baby. I think that's from the 70s. I used to love that song. Okay. Every room above and every cask in the wine merchant's cellars below appeared to have a separate peal of echoes of its own. Scrooge was not a man to be frightened by echoes. He fastened the door and walked across the hall and up the stairs. Slowly, too, trimming his candle as he went. You may talk vaguely about driving a coach and six up a good old flight of stairs, or through a bad young Act of Parliament, but I mean to say you might have got a hearse up that staircase and taken it broadwise with the splinter bar towards the wall and the door towards the balustrades, and done it easy. There was plenty of width for that, and room to spare, which is perhaps the reason why Scrooge thought he saw a locomotive hearse going on before him in the gloom. Half a dozen gas lights out of the street wouldn't have lighted the entry too well, so you may suppose that it was pretty dark with Scrooge's dip. Up Scrooge went, not caring a button for that darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. You see, I don't like a lot of lights on in my house, but that's not because of money thing. I just like the ambiance. I have Christmas lights around my windows for the whole year. So, I mean, but he's just a cheap motherfucker. Okay. But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that all was right. He had just enough recollection of the face to desire to do that. You see, he's a little bit spooked because he saw Marley's face on his knocker. I was going to say, my knockers, there's no face on it, okay? Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, all as they should be. Nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa, a small fire in the grate, spoon and basin ready, and the little saucepan of gruel. Ugh, Scrooge had a cold in his head upon the hob. Nobody under the bed. Nobody in the closet, nobody in his dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall. Lumber room as usual. Old fire guard, old shoes, 2 fish baskets, washing stands on 3 legs, and a poker. So now we've just got a description of his lumber room. I'm thinking that's where he slumbers. I don't know. I guess I'm right. I have no idea. This is very old-timey English. So a lot of these words, I'm like, what the hell is going on? But you know what? We're going to get to the good stuff soon. Let's just get through the exposition, right? Quite satisfied, he closed the door and locked himself in. Double locked himself in, which was not his custom. Oh, he's scared shitless. Thus secured against surprise, he took off his cravat. I love that word, cravat. And you know what? La cravatta is a tie in Italian. There we go. Put on his dressing gown and slippers and his nightcap and sat down before the fire to take his gruel. Because remember, he's got a cold in his head. Ugh, gruel. It was a very low fire indeed. Nothing on such a bitter night. He was obliged to sit close to it and brood over it before he could extract the least sensation of warmth from such a handful of fuel. Ugh, cheap. The fireplace was an old one, built by some Dutch merchant long ago, and paved all round with quaint Dutch tiles designed to illustrate the scriptures. There were Cains and Abels, Pharaoh's daughters, queens of Sheba, angelic messengers descending through the air on clouds like featherbeds, Abrahams, Belshazzars, apostles putting off to sea in butterboats, hundreds of figures to attract his thoughts, and yet that face of Marley, 7 years dead, came like the ancient prophet's rod and swallowed up the whole. Woo! He is really scared. And I love the fact that he's got all these biblical things around his fireplace, yet he's not very Christian-like. But, we're not going to go with that. Okay, where are we? Okay, let's move. Moving forward, Rosie. Okay. If each smooth tile had been a blank at first, with power to shape some picture on its surface from the disjointed fragments of his thoughts, there would have been a copy of old Marley's head on every one. Humbug, said Scrooge, and walked across the room. After several turns, he sat down again. As he threw his head back in the chair, his glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell, that hung in the room and communicated for some purpose now forgotten with the chamber in the highest story of the building. Oh yeah, you know those bells they have by the bedside that you pull on the string and the maid comes down? It was with great astonishment and with a strange, inexplicable dread that as he looked, he saw this bell begin to swing. It swung so softly in the outset that it scarcely made a sound, but soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This might have lasted half a minute or a minute, but it seemed an hour. It's not always the case whenever you're scared shitless. It could be 5 seconds have passed, but thinking you're sitting there a half hour like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, because you're sitting there with your heart in your throat. It's a terrible feeling. It's a terrible feeling, but I still like to be scared during horror movies. That's not the point. The bells ceased as they had begun together. They were succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Scrooge then remembered to have heard that ghosts in haunted houses were described as dragging chains. The cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below. Then, coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door. It's humbug still, said Scrooge. I won't believe it. His color changed, though, when, without a pause, it came on through the heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes. Upon its coming in, the dying flame leaped up as though it cried, I know him, Marley's ghost, and fell again. Yes. Ooh, Nelly. Okay, really quickly. I know the first episode. Ooh, I'm getting hot over here because this thing I'm wearing is very warm. It's a wintry kind of a robe. So it seems shorter than the first episode because I realized I overread in the first episode. So like the first episode is kind of like 2 episodes. So from now on, because it's a very short book, I'm reading like 2 pages to get through this for the next 2 months. So that's why it's shorter. But, you know, the thing is this. There might be some woo-woo with some of the pages and there might not be some woo-woo. But I will say this. I love the fact that the guy that works for Scrooge is like, it's sad. He needs the job, right? So he needs to take Scrooge's abuse. And thank God, because he didn't counteract Scrooge. He knows how to play him. He got the day off with wages. Okay. So Scrooge, as we know, is not the nicest person. But he's not docking his workers' pay for the day. So I'll give him a little bit of like, okay, he's not as horrible as I think he could be. Because it could be worse. I mean, it could be worse, right? Let's think about it. But I do love that now Scrooge is going home. That this is a man who really is dark, but even things, something else can scare him. So it's kind of like us in life, right? Sometimes we feel, sometimes we're going through life and we're doing really well, but something scares us so much, right? And I'm using this very not literally. But then we shake in our boots, but it's also kind of like what COVID's doing to so many people. And we talked about this the last episode. This is something that's really making people fearful. So how did Scrooge react? He's like, oh, bah humbug, and he's not processing and addressing that, holy shit, what is going on? I'm seeing this face. Am I having something wrong? Or what the hell? Am I having a stroke? I mean, no, that's not what happens. But the point is, it's like us. It's like, if we don't process shit and don't let ourselves feel the feelings of whether it's despair, joy, happiness. I mean, besides this is kind of where, I'm going out on a limb because I think we're so used to thinking that we have to stay positive, healthy, and happy and all the stuff all the time. But we don't remember we have to process all feelings. So even if your feelings of meh, or feeling sad, or feeling sorry, or feeling fearful, I do believe it's important to process it. And I talked about it last time, but this only just reiterates that to me, because when it becomes unprocessed and it just sits there and festers, it actually just festers and makes you even worse. So I'm going to encourage you and remind you, if there are any feelings that right now you're feeling, but you're not allowing yourself to feel them. I'm not saying you have to sit and stew in them, okay? Not sit and eat them like gruel, but let them process. And if there's things that you can't process out, find somebody that you can talk to, that you can trust, right? And process that shit out. Because I believe you got to process all this crap out. And I think, like I said, the woo-woo on this is, I do like that seems like the worker knows how to play Scrooge and knows that, all right, I'm not going to push my luck. And where in our lives have we done the same thing, right? We got to alter sometimes how we speak to people because we don't know how they're going to react. And so I'm going to remind you that during these times, a lot of people that aren't processing their fears and such, they're becoming really angry and they're behaving in really violent and terrible ways. So I just want to caution you and say to you, do yourselves a favor. Try to not instigate people that you think you need to walk up and say something to. Because I'm going to be honest with you. I know a lot of people are doing it because they're getting mad at people not wearing masks. And that's different. If someone works in the store, they have to do their job. And I get that. But like on the street, I've seen runners run by me without a mask. I will just avoid them and not say anything, although it pisses me off. The thing is this, you don't know what you're going to encounter. So I like the fact that his worker knows that Scrooge can be, like, if he said something like Scrooge and said, yeah, Mr. Scrooge, I think I should have tomorrow off, and I think it's just due because it's Christmas, don't, and he was like, remember he said the next day you come here even earlier? He didn't fight him. Now, I'm not saying be a doormat for people. We're not talking about that situation. But I'm just saying, you know what? Read the room. Check out the situation, but please always make yourself be in a safe position. That's all I want to say when it comes to what's going on. But then also, on the flip side, when dealing with people in your life, whether it's family members or friends or your partner, obviously, don't be a doormat. I mean, this guy, unfortunately, has to get paid by Scrooge, and he needs the money. We're going to find out that he really needs the money. So the thing is this, you know what? Stand up for yourself when you need to and when you're compelled to, but also discern when the right time is right and when it's not right. Because it's like anything else in life. My friends, we have to learn the power of discernment. We've talked about this before. Sometimes you just can't say what you really want to say to people. And sometimes people can't say what they really want to say either, even though, freedom of speech, especially in America. But I also think we can always be tactful with the things we say. But I also just want to caution everybody, especially now, to please be safe. That's all I want to say. So lo and behold, it was a short little thingy, and these are probably going to be short little episodes, but I think it's just going to be fun to do this for the next 2 months. Anyway, I hope you are all staying healthy. I hope you all staying blessed. And just please know I'm sending you tons of light, love, peace, joy, bliss, abundance, prosperity, magic, fairy dust, and all this wonderful energy, knowing that you are already loved, you are enough, you are worthy, and someone is thinking about you. And my friends, last but not least, until we read again, bye. I'm not gonna lie, I'm just loving this robe. I don't think I ever want to take it off. Okay, bye.